Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Okay, so we're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 11, from verse 16, which is called Calculation of Time from the Atom. So I'll read through the section and then I'll come back to the selected verse for today's talk. Okay. Vidura said, I now understand the life durations of the residents of the Pita planets and heavenly planets as well as that of the human beings. Now, kindly inform me of the durations of life of those greatly learned living entities who are beyond the range of a kalpa. O spiritually powerful one, you can understand the movements of eternal time, which is the controlling form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because you are a self-realized person, you can see everything by the power of mystic vision. Maitreya said, O Vidura, the 4 millenniums are called the Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali Yugas. The aggregate number of years of all these combined is equal to 12,000 years of the demigods. The duration of the Satya millennium equals 4,800 years of the years of the demigods. The Treta, 3,600 years of the years of the demigods. The duration of Dwapara millennium equals 2,400 years, and that of the Kali millennium, is 1,200 years of the demigods. The transitional periods before and after every millennium, which are a few hundred years, as aforementioned, are known as the Yuga Sandhyas, or the conjunctions of 2 millenniums, according to the expert astronomers. In those periods, all kinds of religious activities are performed. O Vidura, in the Satya millennium, mankind properly and completely maintain the principles of religion. Within the other millenniums, religion gradually decreased by one part as irreligion was proportionately admitted. Outside of the three planetary systems, Swarga, Matra, and Ptah, the four yugas multiplied by 1,000 comprise one day on the planet of Brahma. A similar period comprises a night of Brahma in which the creator of the universe goes to sleep. After the end of Brahma's night, the creation of the three worlds begins again in the daytime of Brahma, and they continue to exist through the life durations of 14 consecutive Manus, or fathers of mankind. Each and every Manu enjoys a life of a little more than 71 sets of 4 millenniums. After the dissolution of each and every Manu, the next Manu comes in order, and along with his descendants who rule over the different planets, but the 7 famous sages and demigods like Indra and their followers, such as the Gandharvas, all appear simultaneously with Manu. In the creation, during Brahma's day, the 3 planetary systems, Swarga, Matra, and Ptah, revolve, and the inhabitants, including the lower animals, human beings, demigods, and Pitas, appear and disappear in terms of their creative activities. In each and every Manu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears by manifesting his internal potency in different incarnations as Manu and others. Thus, he maintains the universe by discovered power. At the end of the day, under the insignificant portion of the mode of darkness, the powerful manifestation of the universe merges in the darkness of night. By the influence of eternal time, the innumerable living entities remain merged in that dissolution, and everything is silent. When the night of Brahma ensues, all the 3 worlds are out of sight, and the sun and the moon are without glare, just as in the due course of an ordinary night. The devastation takes place due to the fire emanating from the mouth of Sankarshan, and thus the great sages like Bhrigu and other inhabitants of Mahaloka transport themselves to Janaloka, being distressed by the warmth of the blazing fire which rages through the 3 worlds below. At the beginning of the devastation, all the seas overflow, and hurricane winds blow very violently. Thus, the waves of the seas become ferocious, and in no time at all the 3 worlds are full of water. The Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, lies down in the water of the seat of Ananta with his eyes closed. And the inhabitants of the Janaloka planets offer their glorious prayers unto the Lord with folded hands. Thus, the process of the exhaustion of the duration of life exists for every one of the living beings, including Lord Brahma. One's life endures for 100 years in terms of the different times in the different planets. The 100 years of Brahma's life are divided into 2 parts, the first half and the second half. The first half of the duration of Brahma's life is already over, and the second half is now current. In the beginning of the first half of Brahma's life, there was a millennium called the Brahma Kalpa, wherein Lord Brahma appeared. The birth of the Vedas was simultaneously with Brahma's birth. The millennium which followed the first Brahma millennium is known as the Padma Kalpa, because in that millennium the universal lotus flower grew out of the navel reservoir of water of the Personality of Godhead Hari. O descendant of Bharat, the first millennium in the second half of the life of Brahma is also known as the Varaha millennium, because the Personality of Godhead appeared in that millennium as the Hog incarnation. The duration of the 2 parts of Brahma's life, as above mentioned, is calculated to be equal to 1 nimesha, less than a second, for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is unchanging and unlimited and is the cause of all causes of the universe. Eternal time is certainly the controller of different dimensions, from that of an atom up to the superdivision of the duration of Brahma's life. But nevertheless, it is controlled by the Supreme. Time can control only those who are body conscious, even up to the Satyaloka or the other higher planets. This phenomenal material world is expanded to a diameter of 4 billion miles as a combination of 8 material elements, transformed into 16 further categories within and without, as follows. The layers of elements covering the universes are each 10 times thicker than the one before, and all the universes clustered together appear like atoms in a huge combination. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is therefore said to be the original cause of all causes. Thus, the spiritual abode of Vishnu is eternal without a doubt, and it is also the abode of Mahavishnu, the origin of all manifestations. My section will be verse 33 of Canto 3, chapter 11. I'll just read the Sanskrit. Evam vidaya horatrai kalagatyo kalakshitai apakshitam ivasyapi paramaya vayavatam. Thus, the process of the exhaustion of the duration of life exists for every one of the living beings, including Lord Brahma. One's life endures for only 100 years in terms of the times in the different planets. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Prabhupada ki Jai. Every living being lives for 100 years in terms of the times in different planets, for every different entities. These 100 years of the life are not equal in every case. The longest duration of 100 years belongs to Brahma, but although the life of Brahma is very long, it expires in the course of time. Brahma is also afraid of his death, and thus he performs devotional service to the Lord just to release himself from the clutches of illusory energy. Animals, of course, have no sense of responsibility, but even humans who have developed a sense of responsibility while their valuable time without engaging in the devotional service of the Lord. They live merrily, unafraid of impending death. This is the madness of human society. The madman has no responsibility in life. Similarly, a human being who does not develop a sense of responsibility before he dies is no better than the madman who tries to enjoy material life very happily without concern for the future. It is necessary that every human being be responsible in preparing himself for the next life, even if he has a duration of life like that of Brahma, the greatest of all living creatures within the universe. Om Agina Tabarandasya Yananga Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Tasmaya Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Stapatam Yana Bhutale Swamupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Govinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. 151,000 people die every single day. By the time Srivas Prabhu finishes giving me his feedback, along with the question and answer session, 4,718 people would have died. Now, who here in the room can guarantee that they won't be part of that statistic? That means that it's highly important, the use of our time. How we use our time is fundamental. And in terms of our spiritual movement, there's practically the best example of the person who's using the time the best is Prabhupada himself. And we can understand how we should act based on how Prabhupada himself acted. Krishna states in the Bhagavad Gita 3:21, Jajat Nataviti Shrestas Tatat Avatara Janaha, Sayat Pramanam Kurute Lokastat Anavutate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow in their footsteps. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So what did Prabhupada's life consist of? Satatam Kirtiyantamam Yatantastra Dridavrat Namasyantash Chamambhatya Nityayukta Upasate. Satatam Kirtiyanto. He was always constantly chanting the words of the Lord. Yatantas Dridavrat means he's endeavoring with great determination. And Namasyantash, he was always bound before the Lord, or offering his respects and obeisances. And in that way, the great souls perpetually worshipped Krishna. So Krishna describes that these great souls are like that. So just to give an overview, because we haven't actually had a lecture on a previous section of my chapter, I'll just touch upon a few points so it can give some context to my chapter at the moment. So Vidura, previously he asked for Maitreya Muni to explain the measurements of time. How do you measure time and calculate time? And what are the life expectancies of the living entities who live less than 4,320,000 years? You need to know that. In other words, a kalpa. After understanding that, he then asked Maitreya, okay, what's the life like what's the living entities like, and for planets that exist longer than a Kalpa. So then Maitreya starts speaking about the schedules of eternal time, or the schedules of time. So he starts from atomic time, and then he moves up all the way to the life of Brahma. He talks about Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga, just in terms of time. Divya Yugas, the transitional period between the different ages, and the life expectancies of particular living entities. He also speaks about Brahma's life, what happens when he sleeps, and then also the structure of the universe. Alongside that, he speaks about Brahma's life and what it looks like in the eyes of Mahavishnu. So just a few points to highlight. The first is that Vidura is asking Maitreya. So he's actually inquiring from the Guru. So Krishna talks about the principle of gaining knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita. He declares, Tadvidi pranipatena paraprashnena savaya, upadekshayanti te gyanam gyaninas tattvadarshana. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him and render loving service to him. He can actually give you knowledge because he is a self-realized soul and he's actually seen the absolute truth. A second point is that within the purport of 434, Prabhupada himself makes a statement. He says that blind following and absurd inquiry both are condemned. He also makes a similar point in Canto 1, chapter 19, verse 12. He says, whatever decision we make, however important, must be confirmed by some authority. So even from a purely materialistic perspective, to approach authority means that you can get all sorts of knowledge, guidance, and wisdom. And a perspective that you may not have considered before, or a type of conclusion that you can't actually observe from, work out from observation. So then how was Maitreya able to give this knowledge? It's considered that spiritual knowledge is preserved in a disciplic succession. Evam pram praptam imam rajashaya vidur. Sakalaneha mahata yoga nashta prantapa. Maitreya was able to conserve, preserve, and transfer the spiritual knowledge onto Vidura. Now, there's sometimes a misunderstanding about time in the spiritual world. Prabhupada speaks about time in the purport of 38, verse 38. He mentions that time is actually in the spiritual world. Time exists in the spiritual world. The difference, though, is that time how time works in the spiritual world and how time works in the material world. They have, let's say, different influences. So it works like this. In the spiritual world, there's no control of time. There's no control over activities. Prabhupada mentions in the purport of Canto 2, Chapter 9, verse 4, that time, the influence of time, is conspicuous by its absence. He doesn't say time doesn't exist. He actually says that time is undoubtedly in the spiritual world. But time in the spiritual world facilitates loving exchanges with Krishna and his devotees. So, for example, illusion here serves ignorance. Illusion in the spiritual world is used to serve Krishna and to facilitate those pastimes. So, for example, to not know Krishna's greatness actually helps and maintains that sweetness. So then how does time work here in the material world? It can actually be measured. The idea is this. There was two ways that the Vedic astronomers were able to measure time. The first is this. Pretend that my hand is an atom, and I have the sun. Now the sun's rays will cover the space of the atom according to atomic time. To work out atomic time, you'd work out the time or the duration that the sunlight takes to cross the atom. So that's how they work out atomic time. Now, the time it takes, or the duration it takes, for 6 atoms to combine or to integrate with each other, they would consider that to be a measurement of time. They call it a tresorium. Now, from working out the smallest measurements of atomic time, they can then work out measure the human life expectancy, Brahma's life, planets, orbits of the planets, etc. Another way they used to work out time, is they take a copper pot that weighs around 14 ounces. They'll take a gold rod or probe, which was, the diameter was a little bit longer than the width of my fingers. They will drill the rod into the copper pot and then lay that copper pot onto the body of water. The time it takes for the water to fill into the pot, they call it a danda. A danda in our equivalent time is 30 minutes. So then from 30 minutes, you have two dandas, which equals a mahura to like an hour, and then from that, they can even in the modern academy or the modern, we have our own rendition of it. We have the sand time. So the sand grains are from the top, then they start piling down into the bottom section of the hourglass, and then based on that duration, they can work out so many different times. We must bear in mind that every person's life is on their own sand time. Like that. So then, the age that we're in is Kali Yuga. Maitreya explains that Kali Yuga lasts for 432,000 years. In order to work out the duration of the other ages, you just add 432,000 to it. So for Kali Yuga is 432,000. Dwapara Yuga will be 864,000. Again, Treta Yuga will be 1,296,000. And then finally, Satya Yuga is 1,728,000. So they just work at the times like that, the ages. Then you have the 4 ages: Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali. Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali. That would cycle. 1,000 of those cycles equal 1 day of Brahma. 1,000 of those cycles equal 1 day of Brahma. Finally, Maitreya Muni speaks about this term Yuga Sandhyas. A Yuga Sandhya is a transitional period between ages. So it's not that you have Dwapara Yuga and then you wake up and then all of a sudden it's Kali Yuga. Rather, you have a gradual process from age to age. So it's just like driving a car. You don't just, you want to go from 2nd gear to 3rd gear, you don't just whack the gear stick into 3rd gear. You first apply the clutch, then you move the gear accordingly, release the clutch, and continue accelerating. So that transitional period, they call it a Yuga Sandhya. In Bhaktivedanta, we studied that in Unit 5, Canto 1, Chapter 14, where Yudhishthira Maharaj was looking at the inauspicious omens of the Kali Yuga. What happens when Brahma sleeps? There's a partial dissolution, whereby a number of planetary systems merge with darkness. Here's how it works. Brahma goes to sleep. There's a fire blazing from Sankarshan's mouth. What happens is that would then obviously burn down and destroy certain planets. And it would heat up, the fire would come up to the point of just below, let's say, Mahaloka, which is one of the upper planetary systems. Now what happens is the residents, they find it too hot. So the residents from Mahaloka, cosmic travel, not a problem. They move to Janaloka, which is a higher planetary system. Just like here, sometimes when in India it's too hot. So then people may move to the Himalayas, they go to Australia, they travel around, because it's just somewhat unbearable. Even I found out recently that Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, one of the reasons why he travels in the summer is for that practical reason also, because it gets quite hot like that. So then, water fills up to just below Mahaloka. When that happens, the sun and the moon, they basically have no service. in the partial because everything's destroyed, it's in disillusion. What happens to the sun and moon? They move up, and they shine and heat the rest of the universe. So even the sun's not lazy. There's no service here, not a problem, move up, continue. So that's actually how it works on the dissolution. Now, Maitreya mentions a point. He says this universe appears to be like an atom amongst its coverings. Why? According to the Vedic calculations, the diameter of the universe is 4 billion miles long. Now it has particular coverings. Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita 7.4, Bhumiyapula Naravayo, Kahammunibida Evacha, Ahanka Ityame, Binaprakriti Ashtada. The coverings of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, force, ego, cover this universe. Each covering is 10 times thicker than the previous covering. So you have the universe which is 4 billion miles. The next is 40 billion miles. Then again, 400 billion miles. Then again, 4 trillion. And it covers like that. So by the time you reach the end of the covering, that's why it looks like an atom. So Maitreya is mentioning that point. When all the creation, dissolution, destruction is happening, actually when Brahma's life is over, which is considered to be roughly 311 trillion years, all his life appears to Mahavishnu like it's gone by just in less than a second. So it's considered that his life is, compared to Mahavishnu, is less than an Nimesha. An Nimesha is 8/15 of a second. So when all this destruction, dissolution, creation, annihilation, maintenance, destruction is all happening, it's just less than a second on the eternal time of Mahavishnu. What does this mean? What does this all mean for us? It means that we're all going to have to leave our bodies at some point. We're all going to have to leave our bodies at some point. But Krishna consciousness means that we leave our bodies in style. Krishna consciousness means that we leave our body in style. And Prabhupada knew this, he encouraged it, and he spent his time serving, maintaining devotees, serving humanity in general, and even throughout the night he was translating his books also. Sri Tirtha Prabhu remarks, shares a story, that Prabhupada was up translating his books throughout the night. Prabhupada wanted a disciple with him, so he called Sri Tirtha Prabhu. Sri Tirtha Prabhu said, "Why do I have to stay up all night?" Prabhupada said, "I'm staying up all night." Sri Tirtha Prabhu said, "But you're a pure devotee." Prabhupada went, "Oh, and why are you not a pure devotee?" One time there was a gentleman who approached Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, sooner or later I'll become Krishna conscious. Sooner or later I'll take up Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada said, "Oh?" He said, "Better sooner than later." Do you even know you have a later? Prabhupada understood the emergency of the situation that we're in. And he understood that everybody's lives were of such little time in comparison. Bhagavatam also mentions that Pranaya Purusha Sabya Alavasmin Yuge Jana Manda Samanta Matayo Manda Bhagya Upadrita. That the age, the lives of the people in Kali are short. And on top of that, you have to deal with a short life. They tend to be, let's say, quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky. And then above that, they're disturbed. So we're dealing with practically mission impossible there. And Prabhupada had to deal with that. So then here I just want to quickly focus in on a few Sanskrit terms or phrases in the verse that I selected. The first is Paramayo Vayashatam, which basically means one's life declines, has to come under some exhaustion. So, or rather, let's say, one's life, everybody has to live 100 years in terms of experience, but that 100 years differs from planet to planet. It differs from living entity to living entity. So even in this world, there's certain, you can actually experience that. For example, you have these insects called June bugs. What happens is they take birth in the evening, they eat, they reproduce, they have their own sex life, they sleep, and by the morning they're gone. For them, that's 100 years. For them, that's 100 years. Even in, let's say, places where it's outside but there's light, you have insects, flying insects flying around, take birth, and they just sort of smash into a light, and that's it, that's their life over. So for them, it's 100 years. There's a whole study called subjective time dilation, which talks about how consciousness affects the experience that we have of time. So there's a whole study in that. So even on this planet, people are experiencing time in a different way according to their level of consciousness. It means that the higher or the more aware one's consciousness is, the more they experience a length of time within the same duration as somebody who has less consciousness. TVs are popular these days. TVs actually put your brain into an alpha state, which is a slight hypnotic state. So what happens is that because you're watching TV 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, time just passes. And people watching the TV are thinking, where's the time go? Because actually not conscious. So the duration of life is just slipping away because of that slight hypnotic state. The next term is Upalakshitai Apakshita. Even up to the highest planet, Brahmaloka, down to the very lowest. Each of these places are places where a person has to meet birth and death. But one who attains Maya birth, Krishna says, doesn't actually have to take birth again. So we're dealing with basically a whole cosmic washing machine. Everybody's just getting different entities and souls are being recycled. It's like a whole cosmic roundabout. And at a certain point we'll be tossed off. Brahma understands his, let's say, futility. Prabhupada in the verse, in the purport, he mentions that Brahma engages in devotional service to release himself from the clutches of illusory energy, because he understands that's actually the process. Krishna mentions Jamma Karma Chame Divyam Evim Yoveti Tattvataha Tattvadeham Punarjanma 80 So Arjuna. That a person who can understand the transcendental nature of my activities and appearance, upon quitting his body, does not have to take birth again in the material world, but actually can return to my abode. What's also mentioned in the Bhagavatam is in Canto 1, Chapter 2, Verse 7, where it's mentioned Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayat Yashu Vairagyam Gyanam Chayat Ahaitakam. One who takes up devotional service is automatically blessed with causeless knowledge and detachment. So these are some of the reasons why Brahma actually takes up devotional service. He's afraid of his death. But a devotee isn't. One time, Prabhupada pushed Krishna, I'm not sure if his name is Maharaj now, and Brahmananda, again, don't know Maharaj now, to a certain part of India or Bangladesh. This was happening when there was a lot of conflicts. So Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, their borders were very close. There was a lot of sort of riots like that. When a particular war broke out, Prabhupada found out, he telegrammed them, he said, leave the country immediately. Pushta Krishna Maharaj and Brahmananda Maharaj got on a bus towards the border. They were stopped. By who? By Muslim, sort of maybe radicals. They ordered everybody off the bus, they had guns. They were shooting, they were lining everybody up and shooting everybody. Women, children, the parents, families, everybody was crying. You can imagine the scene. Bloodshed. Brahmananda Maharaj turned to Pushta Krishna Maharaj. He said, put your hand in the bead bag. Put your hand in your bead bag. we're going back to Godhead. So at a certain point, the Muslim radicals aimed their gun at Krishna Krishna Maharaj and Ramananda Maharaj. But what happened is, intuitively, they sensed that they were actually genuinely saintly people. Just before they were going to shoot, they locked the gun down, they said, "Don't worry, get back on the bus," and they drove off. A devotee, a genuine devotee, thorough devotee is actually not scared of his death. Prabhupada mentions in the purple, animals are irresponsible, and if a human acts irresponsibly, they're no better than animals. You have this whole craze. It's called YOLO. You see YOLO on Facebook, you see YOLO on hoodies, you see YOLO on adverts. YOLO. You only live once. So people have got this new YOLO philosophy. So they're trying to enjoy life to the max. Really go for it. They put their senses, beating their heads and taking all sorts to really enjoy life to the max. Because they actually think that they've only got this to have. So now, some people may ask, let's say, what is, or how can we use this chapter to preach? One of the ways I'm preaching in London is at universities. I'm speaking at a university called University College London, UCL. One of the sessions we do is what would you do if you had 24 hours left to live? And people answer bungee jump. Tell that girl, she's really hot like that. Tell the people who I used to have a crush on. Watch MTV Base, which is a music channel. With 24 hours left to live. Do that. Anybody can relate to time. Everybody can relate to time. You see, you can actually bypass people's false ego by using particular topics given in the Vedas that they agree on. So what we try to do is use chapters like this to establish the Vedic authority. Then establishing the Vedic authority, okay, what's the purpose of the Vedas? Is to actually serve Krishna. So by the time they've accepted the Vedic authority, you can actually lead them onto a particular path, on a spiritual path that actually works for them. Chanakya Pandit, he mentions that one should earn money as if they're going to live forever. But in terms of practicing spiritual life, one should practice spiritual life as if he's going to die tomorrow. Bhagavatam, in a sense, gives you the best way to use your time. Bhagavatam mentions Savai Pumsam Paradama, Yato Bhakti Adolshade, Ahayatuki Pratihata, Yagama Supersedity. We don't just want to be happy, sedity. We don't just want to be really happy, prasidity. We want to be completely happy, supersedity. So that's the point. If we wish to be happy, we have to go and align ourselves with the teachings of the Bhagavatam. I'll repeat again. If we wish to be happy, we have to align ourselves with the teachings of the Bhagavatam. There's also another one of my favorite verses. One of the ones I first memorized or remember is in Canto 2, Chapter 3, verse 10. Akama Sarva Kamava, Moksha Kama Adharadi. Tivrena Bhakti Yogena Yajeta Purusham Param. If you have the desire for happiness, riding motorbikes, flying, material desires, if you have the desire to be desireless, you name it, Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, still that person should intensely take to devotional service. According to the different missions of ISKCON, and I'll end with this point, is that, at least for the second mission of ISKCON, Prabhupada mentions that it's to propagate a consciousness of Krishna, as revealed by the scriptures such as Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is what Prabhupada had to do. Krishna in the Gita mentions Manmana Bhav Ma Bhakta Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru. Mama Vaishasi Satyam Te, Patijani Priyosime. Krishna says 6 times, to me, to me, to me, to me, to me, to me. Manmana, give your mind to me. Manmana Bhav Mad Bhakta, become my devotee. Mam Yaji, offer your worship. Mam Namaskuru, and your obeisances to me. Mama Vaishasi, you will actually travel to me. Satyam Te, I promise you that. That's the truth. Patijani Priyosime. Because you're my dear friend. I'll end with this final point. One time, a gentleman, maybe a Hindu gentleman, was criticizing Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. He says, what's this? He criticized one of Prabhupada's disciples, one of Prabhupada's disciples, said, what's this? He said, all this Bhagavad Gita is Krishna, 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 Krishna. Prabhupada said, oh. He said, that person has actually understood my books. We all have to leave our bodies at some point. But Krishna consciousness means that we leave our bodies in style. So when that final note, I'll open up for any questions that any of you may have on any of these points.
You mentioned that example of the TV and how because of watching TV we're not even conscious of the time that passes away, and you were relating that to something of not being conscious. Can you repeat that point again and relate that to our scriptures?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for asking for clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a whole study called subjective time dilation. The research, what happened is you have a focus group that they were researching or looking for, or looking at, or investigating, should I say. The focus group were given 3 clips, movie clips. One was of sadness, one was a very neutral movie clip, and the final one was one that invokes fear. For the neutral and sadness, they asked the focus group to work out roughly how long did the movie clip take to work out. Or sorry, take to last. How long did it last for? So they were approximately, they were pretty accurate in their estimations. Now for the fear-inducing one, they actually overestimated the time in all the cases. Because by inducing fear, your adrenaline is released. When your adrenaline is released and your hormones are released, there's more of a sense of alertness, awareness, consciousness, because now your defense mechanisms are activated. So in that time, they were actually able to experience a longer duration of time with the exact same duration of movie clip. So now with TVs have a disengaging effect because there's so many images flashed per second, so it actually has a slight hypnotic effect. Now because it has a slight hypnotic effect, things bypass your conscious intelligence and go into your subconscious. So you sort of become like dreary, like a zombie, like that. So now because your consciousness is very sort of dull, life passes you by. Does that make sense? And sorry, just before I take your question, you said how does it relate to scriptures? You have different levels of consciousness. In the material creation, there's 8,400,000 species. So each have a different level of consciousness. So as we saw in one of the verses, for Brahma's life, for us it will look like, whoa, his life is 311 trillion human years. And he's lived 155 trillion years already. So for us, you think, whoa, that's a very long time. On the platform of spirituality, when we're talking about Mahavishnu and Krishna, etc., his life is only an imesha, which is less than a second. So as we become more and more spiritual, we actually move into the realm of unlimited time. Is that?
Yeah. You spoke about the point that time is not present in the spiritual world. So, but we understand from Bhagavad Gita that the 5 topics that have been discussed in Gita, like Jiva Prakriti, Ishvara, Kala, and Karma, out of which the other 4 are eternal, whereas karma is not eternal. So time is eternal. How do I understand that time which is eternal is not existing in the spiritual world, because that which is eternal has to be present in both the worlds, So can you just prove this point that, how time not, I mean, like, how is it eternal in the spiritual as well as the material world? Well, material world is very well understood because the entire thing that you explained, your entire class was based on that, So when it's eternal, because we explain from atomic time to the lifetime of Brahma. And then spiritual world time is, the same time is not present, right? So like, how do you understand this concept of eternality of time in the spiritual?
Well, thank you. So your question has a few parts. First of all, because we're so used to the conception of things growing, creation, and destroying, because we're so used to things of a temporary nature, to understand eternality, to understand the spiritual world is sometimes it's difficult to relate to because everything we see is that it has a particular expiry date. So that's the first point. Now, you mentioned that I mentioned that time is not present in the spiritual world. According to Prabhupada's understanding, Prabhupada's purport, and according to what I said earlier, I mentioned that the influence of time is not present in the spiritual world. Time itself is actually in the spiritual world. So time in the spiritual world is eternal. That means that there's no beginning or end. Time here in the material world has a beginning, has an end. And it can be measured. Whereas time in the spiritual world is unlimited and cannot be measured. And it's eternal. That means there's no destruction of it. Does that make sense so far?
Can I further ask a question?
Yeah.
Like, even like you have like the sun rising and the sun setting, Krishna having a Ras Leela in the moonlight. So like you have the day and you have the night existing over there. That means the concept of time is there, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Time there, however, serves Krishna. So, for example, let's take space. Space here constricts. You can measure space. My distance to yourself has a particular. You can measure it. Space in the spiritual world is unlimited, and it serves Krishna. Everything there is to serve the pastimes and loving exchanges between Krishna and his devotees. Bear that point in mind. So, for example, let's say Krishna wants to walk from Vrindavan to Govinda. He can do it in 2 minutes, or he can do it over a few days. It's whatever is best to facilitate the highest expression of love between Krishna and his devotees. Does that make sense so far? That's the same thing with time. Time expands or contracts according to what's going to bring out the highest expression and experience of love between Krishna and his devotees. So the reason, let's say for a sunset, it's considered that, we'll see it in Canto 3, twilight is the time for conjugal exchanges. We'll see that in Canto 3, Brahma, the demons who are very much attached to sex life are created during the time of twilight, because twilight is considered to be that heats up love and exchanges. So if twilight, for example, in the spiritual world helps to facilitate the exchanges between Krishna and his devotees, that's what will happen, because time is there to serve Krishna. Is that clear?
It's very informative. It's like very making us alert about using our time properly. So it's like I thought because you've gone through this so nicely, have you found any solution for those people like me, not at all conscious about time? Not only me, there are many people I know who is not utilizing this time properly, and they misuse time in different ways. have any solution for that to make me personally to make time conscious so that I can utilize human life properly in engaging Krishna service?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So, your question, just to understand it, is how can you, who doesn't feel conscious of time, or who feels like they misuse time, use time in a way that's helpful and progressive? Is that?
Yeah, it's like I'm not using my time properly in Krishna consciousness. I'm not conscious of time at all. After hearing now your things, I get conscious. So I want.
You've actually touched upon the first point, knowledge. So what happens is knowledge has a particular effect on our mind and our intelligence. Now, the reason why a person according to principles, the reason why a person will not be conscious of time is because of the particular effect that the modes have on them, have on their existence. Everybody has a particular quality of existence. The fact that you're in the Dharma is actually increasing the quality of your existence. A person who's not so conscious of time, according to the Bhagavad Gita at least, is because he's influenced by lower modes. Now, in order to not be influenced by lower modes, the first thing is just engaging in scriptural study. By engaging in scriptural study, that will expand your mind and it will expand your intelligence. When your intelligence and mind are expanded, then you'll be more aware, you'll be more conscious of time. The second is that it will be good to understand the value of spiritual life. Because what happens is when you understand the value of something, you will arrange your whole life to facilitate that value. Right? Let's say I value an attractive woman walking along the street, for example. Now, according to the priority of that, I will arrange my life, my finances, my gifts in a way to perhaps try to start a relationship, for example. Right? So whatever you value, you prioritize that. Does that make sense? So understanding the value of spiritual life, reading scripture. And also, when you do take the time out to chant, really being focused and attentive in the chanting. Because as we saw, by being deep in your chanting, it actually blesses you with causeless knowledge and detachment. See, you wouldn't be conscious of time or utilizing time properly because of attachment. So by going really deep in your sadhana and your service, you can become detached. And detachment brings freedom, because that elevates you up to the mode of goodness. So by being in the mode of goodness, you can become a lot more aware and conscious of time. So I'll have to end here.
Time is up.
Thank you.